Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome everyone for attending our first building safety presentation for our Building Safety Month. We had a proclamation at the last council meeting, and we tried to describe what this month was going to entail. We're going to do several presentations. We're going to have our fire department and our police department doing a presentation on what to do in the event of an emergency evacuation situation. We are also going to have the county, I believe Mr. Art Johnson is going to be doing on natural disasters. So if you would, rising waters, what people commonly refer to as a flood, fires, like you said, a more natural disaster type of fire, events of that nature. And we're also going to have water safety. So we're going to have a whole presentation on pools and pool safety and pool permits. We're going to go into detail on that, and that's going to, I think, incorporate the town doing some training on CPR as well. So with that, we start off here. Again, our physical address for our department is 224 West 20th Street, Florence, Arizona, and I am the Director of Development Services, Christopher Salas. I guess really briefly, a little bit about me. I have a degree in mechanical engineering. I have a PE in civil, and I can cover several of the different disciplines from electrical to structural. I am the town's city engineer, that title, as well as the public works director, and now covering development services as well. Our objectives today are an introduction of the building codes, talk about the responsibilities, and I use that term very specifically, the responsibilities of the building official, the permit technician, what a building inspector does, and we're also going to cover code enforcement today. We're going to have some of the building safety key contact information, and at the very end we're going to open it up for questions and answers. So please feel free to ask any specific questions you want or general questions. If you're planning on doing a business remodel, a tenant improvement, you're planning on doing something particular to your own house, adding a pool, adding a patio cover. And so with that, we'll move into our first slides here. Our building official currently is an open position. We're advertising, and we hope to have that filled, hopefully maybe even by the end of this month. We have some promising candidates, and right now we are actually actively attending ASBO, and we're hopefully advertising there as well to hire a building official. In the interim, I'm covering for that position. I, again, have more than a decade of working in development services and actually working with building codes. What is a building official? A building official is generally the jurisdictional administrator of building and construction codes, engineering, calculation, supervision, permits, facility management, and accepted construction procedures. So this is the person in a smaller town like the town of Florence who will take in your plans and do a plan review, will provide you comments and assistance. This person is often looked at as a regulator, and in the town of Florence, it's a facilitator. We're here to hopefully help you guys get through the project. It's a two-way street. It's an interactive process, and it must be an interactive process. It cannot be just a one-way. So, again, the building official position is responsible for the residential and commercial construction sites for compliance with adopted building, erosion control, and zoning codes. The building official manages, directs, and coordinates the activities of the Building Safety Division, including plan check, permit issue, building inspections, coordinates Building Safety Division activities with other departments, divisions, and provides highly complex staff assistance to the Development Services Director. So, once again, anything that relates to your permit, that building official is administering the codes. And we'll get more into the codes in a little bit. Okay. What are the building codes? Building regulations in the United States began in the late 1800s when major cities began to adopt and enforce building codes in response to larger fires in densely populated urban areas. But if anyone attended my last presentation for building safety, building codes go way far back in time to the times of Hammurabi. So again, this is something that is not new. This is something that is, again, very old. And but they usually relate to natural disasters in sense of again, fire. Fire has been one of the biggest issues of why the building codes have changed. But you have structural, you have ADA, you have a lot of things in the code, but fire's a big driver, and you'll notice that as we talk today. The primary intent of early building codes was to reduce fire risk, but over time their scope has broadened. Today, building codes are a set of regulations that address structural integrity, fire resistance, safe exits, lighting, ventilation, and construction materials. They specify the minimum requirements to safeguard health, safety, and general welfare of building occupants. This is an important one to remember. These are the minimum requirements. And so generally speaking, the way our staff has been trained to do, we cite code references when we're looking at plan sets, and we require just the minimum requirements. I try never to have my employees look at and evaluate and say, oh no, because of this, we need this. We regulate to the minimum requirements of the code. It's a pretty black and white situation throughout the codes there. What is the International Code Council, or ICC? So the ICC is a US-based membership association. It's dedicated to developing and model codes and standards used in the design, build, and compliance process to construct safe, sustainable, affordable, and resilient structures in the built environment. So getting back to the last slide, what this is saying is, again, these are the minimum requirements. And why they're the minimum requirements is because, guess what? More extensive codes cost people money. So the whole purpose of this is to have the minimum codes required. No one wants to say, oh no, your floors have to be made out of marble. That's not what the codes are there for. It says, here are the minimum codes that your building has to be built to. So members including building, fire, plumbing, mechanical, and energy officials representing federal, state, county, and municipal governments. Members are also architects, engineers, designers, builders, labor groups, contractors, elected officials, manufacturers, and other representatives of the construction industry. So another thing important to note is when codes are changed, there's a process. And oftentimes, a lot of these groups have lobbyists that participate in this because the last thing they want is something that drives up the cost of it. So they have an ability to appeal the codes and be part of the code council. So once again, it was what I said earlier, it is a two-way street. Everyone has to participate in this, including the adoption of the codes. The international codes, or I-codes, are model-based, published, and developed by the ICC members to provide minimum safeguards for homes, buildings, and other structures. The ICC uses a governmental consensus process to develop its codes. The I-codes are a complete set of comprehensive, coordinated codes for all aspects of construction. So once again, we have a book on the IRC, which is called the International Residential Code. We have a book called the IBC, which is the International Building Code. We have one on plumbing, the IPMC, International Plumbing. We have one on the Mechanical Code. We have one for existing, so that is IEBC. And that's a very fascinating book that we use in Florence a lot because people have existing buildings. And sometimes they sit for 10 years, sometimes they sit for a year, and they have to come back in for now a new certificate of occupancy because the occupancy's changed. Once again, we'll get more into the details later, but I'm just trying to set the basis of all the different books that we have to look at. Don't let me forget the International Fire Code, the IFC. So again, we probably have about, I think I counted the last thing, about 8,000 pages and probably close to 80 pounds worth of books that we administer. What are the benefits of the I-codes? So building science, technical knowledge, and past experience benefits the I-codes. Provide protection from man-made and natural disasters, guard public health, and reduce property loss. So at one time, way back, we had structural failures, which we don't tend to have in modern society. We had buildings that caught fire. I mean, one of the famous fires, I think would have been in the 70s, was the MGM Grand. And we've learned from each and every fire that have happened. I actually was, gosh, I can't remember now what the year was, 2003. We had a big fire on, I think, 35th Avenue in Phoenix, 35th Avenue Southern, McDowell. And because of that, the Phoenix Fire Department, when the fire department had a firefighter that actually lost his life in that, Brett Tarver, we actually created a Brett Tarver sprinkler ordinance, which changed the way that, and it had an immense amount of training that the city of Phoenix created and adopted policies, and that benefited Glendale, that benefited Chandler, that benefited all of us because we came in there and we learned from what occurred. And mindful, I didn't use the word mistakes. That's not what this is about. Things happen and we learn from them, building safety. Model codes keep construction costs down by establishing a uniformity of the construction industry that allows building and material manufacturers to do the business on a larger scale, resulting in cost savings. So let's take our current home builder out here is Pulte on the new subdivision north of us. And so they follow the building codes, and because of that, they create big plan sets, and they're able to produce lots of homes at a known cost. They're able to predict their costs because they have approved plans. Codes also help protect real estate investments by providing a level of quality and safety which can result in lower insurance costs. Existing structures generally are required to meet the code that was in place when the property was built. However, newer codes may apply to an existing building when it is altered or a permit is required. So change of occupancy may also impact which codes apply. So let's take a second to talk about a commercial building. A commercial building that was built, I'm just going to pick an arbitrary date, 1950. This building was built, and for the purposes of mercantile, it used to sell goods. And it sold goods for 40 years. Then that building was closed down for 3 months, and someone else sold it, someone else bought it. And now the property is going to be used for mercantile. They're going to sell goods. For the most part, that building would be inspected to make sure no unpermitted work was done during that time, and a certificate of occupancy would be granted because there's not a change of use, and the building met codes when it was built, in theory. And so without a change of use, for the most part, that use would continue. But instead of mercantile, let's say they want to do a factory. They want to bring in a disposal of fluorescent light bulbs. And because of that, it's a complete change of use. And that change of use then requires all new codes to be met. And because of that, sometimes all those new codes bring other things into the equation. And so your ventilation system, because they're crushing these glass and these have toxic gases in the fluorescent tubes, they would have to have a different type of mechanical code applied for it. They would have to have different, depending on what the materials would be, they might have to have different fire rated structure. They may have to have a fire alarm. The building may have to be sprinklered. It goes on and on. And so that was a perfect example of change of use. That's more of a commercial concept than a residential. Residential is, it was a home, it is a home. It's a dwelling unit. Oh. Okay. I want to introduce, unfortunately she's not here, she's actually getting training right now. Tracy Wilgus is our permit technician. So when you first walk into our building, and when you walk and you look to the left, she's the person in the back that is your permit technician. What is a permit technician? Or what is a permit tech? This is where it all begins. What kind of plans do I need? How long will it take? How much is the permit fee? Do I need a contractor? These are our common questions. And so, obviously, a permit tech assists the public with permit-related questions, performs a compliance review at the counter, records required information in the permit software, and collects funds and issues permits. So, when you first walk into the building, let's say this gentleman over here, he owns a commercial building, commercial property, and he says, I have a line on a new tenant, but I have to do a tenant improvement, Chris. I'm not changing any structural walls, and I'm not changing the use. Do I need a permit to go in there clean and put new flooring in? Do I need a permit for that? The answer is no. The answer is no. Let's say he comes in for the same thing and he says, I want to completely change, I want to put some new walls in, I want to do some new windows, I want to do some new doors. And so some of that requires a permit, and so some of it doesn't. And we always ask everybody, work with the town staff from the very beginning so that you end up with a product that you want as well. So come in and see us. At the end of this, I'll be discussing about this coming Friday, we have an open house for anyone to come in. But the truth of it is, in building safety, development services, every day is open house, every day. A lot of times I'm not directly available. An appointment needs to be set up. But within usually 48 hours, we're able to meet with staff, and depending on the length of it, if it's a quick question, I'll come to the front counter and assist anybody with a quick question. But if it's sit down, we need to look at a set of plans, that requires an appointment. Permit application requirements. So we're going to talk about the actual permit application real quick here. So, and these requirements are part of, again, the IRC and the IBC. These are actual requirements. We're not making this stuff up. So it's a site plan that shows property lines, all existing buildings on the lot, including their dimensions from other structures, proposed construction, and distance to property lines. Why this is important is because it all relates to what else you can do on that property. So there's a zoning aspect to the property lines. You're only allowed to put a building so close to that. There's also what's called a fire separation requirement based on those property lines as well. So those property lines are very important. And the proximity to other structures depending on what it is you're planning on doing. So floor plan, this is assuming that you're doing something along the lines of an addition, so that's why a floor plan would need elevations, structural, mechanical, building elevations, structural details. So again, this slide is kind of talking about if you're doing a patio cover, some of the stuff would be required. If you're doing a pool, not all the stuff would be required. So that's why I said at the end we'll open up to Q&A, and if anyone has a question, feel free to ask at that time there. So mechanical, plumbing, electrical, again, these are things, if you're going to want to make those changes to a building, you'll need to show those on your plan. If you're not planning on doing any electrical upgrades, obviously you don't need that. It really depends. Contractor requirements, protect your investment, hire licensed contractors. This one's going to be a challenging discussion here on this here, but what we try to let people know is there's a lot of scams out there where people lose money, and it happens a lot in Florence Gardens. It's a demographic where people are taken advantage of. And so we ask people, or we advise people, try to use licensed contractors. We realize it costs a little bit more, but it's to your benefit. On some projects we can't require it, some projects we can. So here's what some of that discussion is. A handyman is not authorized to do any work that requires a permit unless they are properly licensed. Well, if they're properly licensed, then they're not really considered a handyman. So let's say you wanted to make structural modifications to your trusses or do an addition, that stuff requires a permit. And so therefore, it cannot be a handyman. It has to be a licensed. Owner builder does not apply if the structure is for sale or for rent. We get that one sometimes too. We get it with investors. We get it with renters or property owners who rent property. And they say, well, I want to pull an owner building permit. We've also had it from a person who actually lived out of state, knowingly acknowledged they lived out of state, but then they were upset and frustrated that they couldn't do an owner builder permit. And it says, no, and this is not a town of Florence requirement. This is a state law. The state law says that you must reside in that dwelling unit, and it has to be your primary residence. Both of those things have to occur if you want to do an owner builder permit. So even if you own the property, it does not mean if you're renting it or leasing it that you can pull your own permit on it, because you're not the dweller of that unit. Here's a copy of our building permit application. I apologize. That's going to be a little bit tough to read. I do apologize. But essentially, I'll walk you through some of the information on here. So we have a date, an applicant name, an email, and then we have a relationship to the project. So sometimes the contractor pulls the permit, sometimes the owner pulls the permit. Contact information. We have the information for the contractor that needs to be filled out. And then we have several areas here where it says for residential, commercial, and miscellaneous. And then we have a scope of work. I can't stress this enough. Make sure you do a good job on your scope of work. We struggle with that area a lot where people only put down like a few words. That kind of tells us what you're trying to do. That enables us to do a better job on the actual review. Believe it or not, it is an issue. Fee schedule. This is another one of those common misunderstood and common questions is, why are you charging me this, or what? Tell me how this works. So Fee schedule. The valuation of the project based on the licensed contractor's written estimate of the project building materials and labor. This is a very common one there. And now the town of Florence has a couple of others though as well. If an owner builds a project, the valuation of the project is based on the applicant's written estimate of the building materials plus labor factor of 30% on the building material cost. Apologize. So essentially what we do is we get your invoice, your estimate from Home Depot, and then we add 30% onto this. Now this was a code adopted policy, an ordinance. So again, this isn't something staff has made up. This is what your council has essentially adopted. The valuation of the project utilizing the most recent valuation data from the table of the International Code Council found on the ICC website at. This is if you actually go to the ICC website, and we've listed their URL there. Twice a year, this is updated. And this is more along the lines for, generally speaking, for the Pulte's of the world, your home builders of the world. So this is, it's a standardized way so that everyone gets treated fairly. But if you're a commercial job, you're generally going to do just the valuation of the project based on the licensed contractor. So we require it to be on their letterhead, and we generally ask for an itemized list so that we understand. We understand there's some legitimacy to the evaluation. You can't just sit there and say, Chris, the contractor's doing this for $1. It's like, no, obviously they're not. So we do require that to be an estimate. And the building official, per the building code, has every right to question or reject valuations if they seem ridiculous. Our building inspector has been with the town now for a little over a year. His name is Cody Curtis. So a building inspector ensures that commercial and residential constructions meet local and national building codes and ordinances. So in layman terms, he takes the permitted work, the permitted plan set, construction documents, and verifies this work is to the plan. This is a 2x4, this is a 2x4. That's a 4x4, that's a 4x4. This requires the sill plates to be made out of pressure-treated lumber. They have pressure-treated lumber, so forth and so on. It's a simple black and white type of thing. The building inspector, at least in this town, is not allowed to ask for things outside of the permitted construction documents. If something is missed, he'll bring it back to me and we'll address it at that point. But it's not, he's just not allowed to have carte blanche and make changes. Oh, I want to see this, or I want you to do that. That's not the way that we operate. Again, these are the minimum requirements. The town of Florence currently is on the 2006 International Residential Code and the 2006 International Building Code. That's not too far from being changed. We're hoping to change to the 2012, adopt the 2012 building codes, hopefully in the next 2 months. We're there. I can see the horizon. The I-codes mentioned before are the standards that are applied to building reviews and inspections. So that's, again, your mechanical code, your electrical code, your energy code, your plumbing code, let alone the IBC, IRC, IFC. What is the International Residential Code, or IRC? The principles of the IRC are based on the protection of public health, safety, and welfare. Provisions of the code encourage the use of new and smarter technological advances. So I can't remember which code adoption it was, but again, every code adoption, we see newer and newer technologies. Up into the most recent codes, I think it's 2018, we're now seeing lumber, which is the very first time ever, in high-rise commercial buildings, which is kind of frustrated the steel industry because that used to be their domain and their domain only. But again, these are the minimum requirements. So if people want to build a high-rise out of wood, they can as the newest codes. A little bit tough, but it can be done. The IRC emphasizes both prescriptive and engineered solutions and allows the use of time-tested methods. So what the prescriptive means is that if you look in the book, there's an answer right there. You're not necessarily doing calculations to get to that. No engineering is involved. So if you want to know what size of a rafter or a 2x6 rafter, how far it can span, you look up in a little table and you're like, oh, that's how far it can span between supports. It's all there. I'm not saying it's easy to read or understand, but it is all there. And we can help you if you guys have projects. The IRC is the bare minimum standards to build 1- and 2-family dwellings and townhouses of 3 stories or less. There are some more specific requirements to this, but it gets way into the details, so we'll skip that. Here's prescriptive design. Prescriptive design is used in the IRC to give time-tested methods for safe construction, such as rafter spacing, beam sizes, beam lengths, and floor sheathing requirements. So if you have 24-inch rafter spacing, you will require a certain thickness of wood to go on top of that, obviously, so people don't fall through. So there's a table for 12-inch, 16-inch, 18-inch, and 24-inch rafter spacing, floor joist spacing for the sheathing. And so, again, that's all that's kind of discussing, is that there's a prescriptive, it's charts that you're able to look through. Here's some more examples of some of the prescriptive natures. Again, it's showing you the spacing requirements for the toilet, for, once again, water closet. And then we have footing details over here. So the book actually tells you, based on a soil bearing capacity, what your thickness has to be for your continuous footings. This is all in the book. There's a little bit to figure out in that one. It's not just a chart. What is the International Building Code, or IBC? The principles of the IBC are based on protection of public health, safety, and welfare. They're all the same. That's what drives us, is eventually public health, safety, and welfare. The IBC is specifically correlated to work with the ICC family of codes. That means it frequently refers to the International Plumbing Code, International Fire Code, International Mechanical Code, and the International Property Maintenance Code, to name a few. The IBC is not prescriptive in nature and requires design by registrants and engineers in certain areas. So specifically, if we're talking about commercial work requires an architect. He requires mechanical engineers, plumbing, electrical engineers, and so forth. These are the requirements of a commercial building. Every once in a while, someone wants to do a very small tenant improvement. It's very small in nature. Registrants can be avoided on a very, very small project. It just depends. Again, meet with staff, discuss your project, and we'll see if something can be done. Residential building. One new house will have multiple inspections while being built. On average, the town does 100 to 120 inspections a week on new homes. As you can see here, we have soils, pre-slabbed, strap and shear, frame, drywall, gas, electric, and the final C of O. This is a very normal process in the town of Florence. It's well documented. Everyday inspections. So every day we're out looking at gas lines, re-roofs, electrical to barbecues, solar voltaic. Like I said earlier, the people who weren't in the room, approximately 25% of the town of Florence's permits are solar. About 22 a month we probably average. I do a ton of solar review. Room additions and Arizona rooms. Commercial construction. Currently there are several commercial jobs in our community. Adamsville Hospital, Burger King, we just finished the McDonald's, the Banner Health, and now we're doing a new Circle K is being built. Commercial inspections take more time to inspect due to their size and complexity of the project. For example, a framing inspection at Circle K will take approximately 2 hours to walk the entire site. A lot to look at. Scheduling inspections. An ongoing commitment to improve our customers' experience, the town of Florence provides access for scheduling, inspections, and tracking submittals at the following link. So you can actually follow your project, if you so want, using the following link. But you can also schedule inspections, and we actually prefer that inspections get done through this link. It really does save us time versus calling in. If you are unable to access this website, you can utilize the town's voicemail system for the building inspector at 520-868-7601. Before calling, you will need permit number, address of inspection, and inspection type, which these are actually listed on your permit. So you just need to keep checking them off as you go and knowing where you're at. It is the permit holder's responsibility to keep that permit and all approved construction documents on their site at all times. The inspection request must be received by 2 p.m. the working day prior to the scheduled within the next 2 days. So what that means is anybody who called today before 2 p.m. should expect their project to be inspected the following day, which would be Thursday and or Friday. We probably do less than 2% of our inspections on that second day. Almost everything gets done on the first day, but every once in a while, we get a very high call-in and some stuff has to get pushed, but not generally. Curtis Williams is our code enforcement officer. He's also at training. So what is a code enforcement officer? A code enforcement officer helps retain the community's appeal by enforcing land use ordinances. So these are obviously our zoning codes. They make sure zoning laws are followed, graffiti is quickly abated, and unkept properties are maintained by their owners. The officer will investigate when someone makes a complaint about a lawn or vacant lot that hasn't been mowed for several weeks. A code enforcement officer requires the abilities to learn ordinances, to apply those ordinances to real-life situations, to explain decisions, and communicate tactfully in different situations. This is a very tough job. I will say this, nobody wants to deal with code enforcement issues. It's a very tough job. So, why is code enforcement reactive and not proactive? I want to sit there and say is it can be proactive, and the town is working more towards those types of efforts. We are in the process, as everyone knows, we're in the process of adopting a code enforcement manual. That code enforcement manual does not change anything. The ordinances are already written. The code enforcement manual is merely a manual that helps the layman understand what some of these code enforcement are. But in an effort to be fair, by not singling out individuals or areas, the town has implemented a policy of investigation and enforcement by patrol and public requests. So I, myself, make requests of Curtis Williams to go look at this property and deal with this property. Those are put on a list, and he tries to stay up with those. At the same time, we do take complaints from residents. Why fill out an investigation form? In order to facilitate consistency and efficiency, a minimal amount of information is required to locate, identify, and respond to both the offender and the complainant. Why does it appear some complaints are enforced and others are not? Enforcement is directly related to what is adopted and addressed in the town code. No action can be taken. I'd like to expand on that a little bit. So we have pretty clear codes as of today and what can and can't be enforced, and we do our very best to enforce those codes. I'm not so sure that we have any people as of right now in the last year since I've been here on this division where we have people who sit there and say we're not enforcing the codes. Whatever complaints we've been given, we have followed through. Forms can be found and filled out at Town Hall, not the Development Services Building. I'm trying to figure out why, because I'm not sure why aren't they in my building, but we'll look into that more later. Why does the process take so long? Requests for investigation are reviewed in the order received. If the property is found to be in violation of the adopted codes, this is the process that the code enforcement officer follows. I have never heard so much about why it takes so long. We're usually out there 48 hours. I can't believe we're even out there after 72 hours. We're out there pretty quick, but it does take a little bit of time, and I think maybe that's the point of this slide, is that the town of Florence takes a policy of working with property owners before fining them. So we normally go out there, we post our little sign, we mail out the violation, and we knock on the door and give them the violation and says, here's what your violation is. You have 30 days to abate the situation. So maybe that's what the complaints are. And we let people have those 30 days. Usually it's done pretty quickly. But sometimes people have a very big mess. And that is not so easy for them to clean up. And if a person is maybe of age or not as ambulatory as the next person, handicapped, there may be several reasons why that they may struggle to clean that up. So we try to work with people as long as they're making an active effort and are participating, again, two-way street, we're willing to work with people. We give people extensions all the time as long as they're working on this project. So again, this list is kind of a little challenging to read here, so I'm going to walk everyone through a little bit of this. So first off, once we get the complaint, we verify if a violation exists. So on the left side there, we have violation found. And so it says immediate action not required or immediate action required. So let's say somebody has standing water, mosquitoes, a big issue. We may only give someone like that 3 to 5 days to clean that mess up because that's a public health concern. And with West Nile virus, we would probably treat that a little differently than a little bit of noxious weeds. So again, we'd work with the responsible party. We'd issue our notices, and quite possibly we may have to go to an administrative hearing and then civil or criminal action. These can result in violations, citations, and ultimately the town has the right, adopted under ordinance way before my time, but we have the ability to what people refer to as clean and lean. So if it gets so bad where we're not getting cooperation from property owner, we have the ability to hire an individual for them to clean it up and then lien your property. I sure hope that we don't have to do much of that. That's not a very pleasant thing to do, but towns and cities do it all across the United States when they reach an impasse. Here's some of our contact information. We did bring cards if anyone needs cards. Where are the cards? Okay, we have the cards available. Top right, that's our permit technician, Tracy Wilkes. Cody Curtis is again the building inspector. Curtis Williams on the bottom right is our code enforcement officer. Susie Jonas is right here, sitting up in front. She is the glue that keeps development services running. She schedules our meetings, so if you want to have some time with me, contact her, schedule a meeting. And again, there's myself, Christopher A. Salas, and I am the director and the town engineer. And like I said, we have my cards available as well. And so looking back, were our objectives met? We talked about the building codes. We talked about the responsibilities of the building official, the permit technician, the building inspector, code enforcement officer, and then we had our contact information. So with that, I may give some examples, or we can open up any questions that anyone may have. Does anyone have any questions at this point? I'll give a couple examples, because I think they're beneficial. So let's say somebody, whether it's in Anthem or Florence Gardens or Florence downtown, they want to do what is considered a, let's say an awning, and they want to use a pre-engineered aluminum structure. What are the requirements? So typically, you'll hire a contractor. They'll pull a permit. They'll supply me with drawings. They'll have a site plan. So the site plan is ensuring that you're not too close to any adjacent walls, that you meet zoning, that you meet fire separation, and that it's not impeding anything else on your property. Then on the plan set, for a pre-engineered aluminum structure, they'll have a plan set that's a complete pre-engineered set, and they'll just take a highlighter and they'll mark the little pieces of equipment they're using to justify a specific plan now. They'll usually sketch these on a piece of paper. They're done with the ruler. They look very nice. And so you'll have a plan view, so I'll be able to see what the roof looks like, the dimensions, the posts. Then you'll see it in profile from the front, so I'll be able to see, again, the width between the posts, and they'll typically call out all the dimensions, and then you'll see a side elevation, a profile, east to west, north to south. It just depends on the orientation of the house. So relatively simple. The contractors are pretty used to that. It flies through pretty easily. Most of those are approved the first time through. I have a red pen. I mark up anything that specific needs some clarification on there, and we permit the project. If they don't agree with those comments, they can always sit there and say, I disagree. But usually it's just things that they've left out that are in the highlighted drawings already on the back side of it. Another common permit from the town of Florence is pools. So people who want to have a pool, they hire a contractor. So someone like, I'm not afraid of necessarily using any names. I don't think it's a big deal. Shasta does a lot of pools out here in Florence. They do them in Anthem. They do them downtown. Shasta builds pool across the United States, so it's a common company. We have another company called Dyco Pools. Presidential Pools is a very big company in Arizona. I believe that's an Arizona-based company. But these are just three of the ones that I bring up. And so I want to speak to something that's very commonly misunderstood in the industry right today, is that one of the complaints when I got here was, you're requiring load calculations for a pool, Chris. Yes, sir, I am requiring load calculations. So one of our books, the NEC, has a very specific requirement that when adding additional branch circuits, NEC section 220.83 requires you to analyze the system to make sure you're not overloading it. Now, when I say this, it seems so common sense, and it's to protect your life, safety, and welfare. So we require that. I'm not sure how many towns don't require it. The pool industry has been pretty frustrated at that requirement, even though it only takes me about 7 to 8 minutes to do those calculations. It's a requirement by the book. It's not a requirement by the town of Florence, it's a requirement of the book. So that's a common requirement. So on a pool set, walking through that, we need to see a site plan, and on that site plan, it needs to include where the conduit is being run, so that my inspector can verify that's the location. And in that conduit, you need to have a certain type, and you have to have a certain burial depth, and you have to have a certain diameter of the pipe. And then within that, you have to label what type of wire, and what size of wire, and how many conductors of wire you're going to run to your pool. With that, it's very typical, 50, 60 amp breaker. So we have to verify that 60 amp breaker and those wires can supply your equipment. So that's another issue I get all the time. They don't give me the cut sheets for the material. I said, how can I verify if the wire is large enough in the breaker for this equipment? You have to provide me this. So it's getting a little bit better, but once again, as I explain these things, they seem like common sense. Like, how can they give you A and B, but not C? Well, that's my question as well. So we require those things in there. And like I said, pools are usually permitted within 1 or 2, we never have more than that, but 1 or 2 reviews. And the review from 1 is very simple. Here are our comments. And so, pretty simple stuff. The most complicated thing for anybody, especially if they're trying to do it themselves, is a room addition. Very, very challenging project. There is a lot to show on a set of plans for room additions. And so with that, I tell people, you probably want to hire what I call a semi-professional, someone who has some real knowledge of how a structure is put together. So you could hire an ex-framer, an ex-contractor to kind of sketch something up. It does not have to be done in AutoCAD. That's another one of those questions. I don't have money to pay for an architect. Whoa, whoa, whoa. We didn't ask you to have an architect, but I do have to have some semblance of a drawing to understand what a wall detail is going to look like, what a footing detail is going to look like, what our rafter details are, what our truss details are going to have in there, floor joists. So, and we can work with people, and we can give you guys examples. If you're like, I have no idea where to start. Well, let me take an old drawing and white out some of this information here and make a photocopy for it. So now you understand what your series of sheets need to look like. Solar. Solar cannot be owner-builder in the state of Arizona. The state of Arizona has a requirement that has to be installed by a licensed contractor. I don't know that's across the United States, but I do know that that's the state of Arizona. That's what's really relevant to us today, is the state of Arizona. So we have several companies out here. I think we have at least 4, if not 5, who do the solar voltaic installations. So we see simple systems. We see systems with battery backup. We see stuff with critical load centers. Whatever you're wanting to do, work with your contractor. They'll know how to get a submittal in. I tell everyone, let the contractor handle the permitting process. I know sometimes they charge a little bit more, but it's a lot of headache for a person who's not used to the permitting process. And your contractor does know what they need to submit. So I've covered a little bit again of pools, patio covers. Let's go over gas lines real quick there. Gas lines is similar to like a swimming pool or a spa. You're going to need to show a site plan. On that site plan, you're going to show, assumedly, either a gas line or a gas line and electrical, which just made me think of something. So if you have gas and electrical, you're going to have to show schematically where they're going, sizes, material type. It's kind of getting boring at this point, right? We keep saying the same things, and truthfully it is. It's kind of like the same stuff over and over, just different applications. So if you have a contractor, some contractors can install the gas line, but they may not be licensed to do the electrical. So be aware that your contractor needs to be licensed for all the equipment if that's what their permit is showing in there. We do sometimes run into that problem, and we do check. So one of the things that occurs before a permit is issued, we verify the register of contractor, the ROC number, and their license information. And then we check the license information towards the scope of work. And that's why I said that was important earlier, because we match all those different things together to make sure the licensed contractor can do all the license work. And sometimes they cannot. And I'm given the job of giving people bad news, and letting them know you're not licensed for this. And oftentimes it's met with kind of a bit of a laugh. They knew that they couldn't do this work, but I guess we're hoping they wouldn't get caught doing that there. The penalties for doing unlicensed or unpermitted work, they're pretty steep. We double permit fee per the code book, anything that has been caught that was not permitted. So if you were going to pay $300 for a permit, you're now paying $600 for a permit. That's the penalty for doing work illegally. You should have a permit. If you have any questions, please feel free to stop by our building and ask us, does this require a permit? I can cover that pretty simply right now. In the IRC, I think there's 8 exceptions for a permit. In the IBC, there's 13 exceptions for a permit. It's pretty black and white. If it's not an exception, it requires a permit. It is black and white. If it is not an exception, it requires a permit. That's why the book is written. That's why it only lists those 13 things. Those are the exceptions. Everything else requires a permit. And it does describe, like I said earlier, about if we're just doing flooring. So our facilities manager, Tom Salaya, if he was coming in here and reflooring this building, wouldn't require a permit. Painting the walls wouldn't require a permit. Changing out those sconce lighting, not a permit. But let's say he says, Chris, I want to remove those lights up there and install LEDs. Not a permit. But if he wanted to install additional lighting, does he have the ability to install additional lighting, daisy chaining it off the existing branch circuits? That's his responsibility to show me that. He most likely would have to hire an electrical engineer, but if it was a small enough project, he might be able to provide me the branch circuit location and the wires and the lighting on that branch circuit. So that's a possibility. Let's say he wanted to install a brand new HVAC unit out here. Let's take that example. Oh, Chris, it's a 3-ton unit, and we're going to replace it with a new 3-ton unit. It's like for like. Okay. You're still going to need to do an air balance report at the end of this to make sure it meets the mechanical specification as the original design. So even though part of it doesn't require a permit, another part of it does require a permit. Well, let's just say this. This is one of my favorite examples. And I won't say who in the community did this project here, but someone had 5 obsolete HVAC units, and their argument was, I'm going to install just 3 modern ones. I said, that's great. That's great. But I'm assuming the 3 are larger than the original 5, so you're going to need to do updated electrical? Well, yeah. And those 3 are going to be duct completely different than the 5, right? Because you don't have like a manifold system. Yeah. So you're going to need drawings, you're going to need permits, you're going to need electrical, you're going to need mechanical. Very complicated for what seems to be a simple project is very complicated. So again, meet with staff before you get caught doing unpermitted work. Those are just some of my examples, like I said. But my end-all advice for this presentation is come meet with staff or send an email, pick up a phone, whatever you want to do, ask the question. This is a pretty regular thing is, do I need a permit for building a patio cover? Depends on the size. How close can I put my shed to the property? Well, depends on the size. So, and with that, thank you guys very much. I appreciate everyone's time, and you guys have a good rest of your week. Good night.